Hello, my yarny friends. I'm Sara Sach. Welcome back to another edition of This or That, and sometimes the other thing. Well, today we're going to be discussing, do you take the time to read your yarn labels? We're going to talk a little bit about what's on the label, and then also a little bit about the numbers that are on the label. What's the weight of the yarn? What does it mean? All right. Now, the question for you is this. Do you read the labels? So we're going to answer some of the questions about labels on yarn because those are the questions that I have gotten lately is about yarn labels and do you have to do what it says? How do you know what to do with it? And so we're going to be doing this in 2 steps. Today we're going to be talking mostly about the yarns, what the label means about the yarns. And then next week we're going to cover some other things about yarn and yarn labels. Because I've got a lot of questions and I don't think I can get them all into one video, okay? If you want to, you could grab some different yarns that you have on hand and then take a look at them and sort of follow along with us. But I'm going to be showing you some yarns and I've made the graph just a little bit bigger so we can talk about it. But this way you can see on your own yarn skeins what it has on there and what it's talking about. All right, so let's click over to the other camera. So today what we're going to be talking about is these 3 symbols, okay? And I brought this one out because it has the big symbols. These all have them, they're just smaller and harder to see. All right, and so this one is Premier Just Yarn Value, medium weight, number 4. This is the basic DK, which is a light 3. We've got the Premier Bloom, which is a bulky 5, and then Chunky Premier Basic Chanel Brights is a 6, super bulky. All right, so here is what the graph looks like. You're going to have a square, usually, not all yarns do it this way, but you'll usually have a square like this, and it's going to usually have a little skein of yarn there, and it'll have a number. And that number is your yarn weight. All right, so I'm going to turn the graph over, and what we have here are the yarn weights. 0 is a lace weight. Number 1 is super fine. Number 2 is fine. 3 is our light or DK. 4 is a medium weight. 5 is bulky. 6 is super bulky. And 7 is jumbo. There's also an 8 now that's a super jumbo, the big thick ones. And they all serve a different purpose. And it's very important that you know which one of those yarns that you're working with. All right. Now I'm going to take this and show you. There's 2 boxes here, and that's what these other 2 boxes are. And what these other 2 boxes are is this one is about knitting, because you can see it has 2 knitting needles. And this one is about crochet. It has a crochet hook. When I was growing up, they were both called needles. When I was a little girl learning to crochet, you had knitting needles and a crochet needle, and then it changed to hook later on. I know some people get real annoyed if people call a crochet hook a needle, but years ago, that's what it was actually called. Okay, so let's talk about this first box. Okay, this is for knitters. You can see it gives you a recommended knitting needle size. 6 millimeter. Up here it says 10 by 10 centimeters. And what that is your swatch size. When you want to check out a pattern, you want to see what your gauge is, you knit a 10 by 10 centimeter or 4 by 4 inches. And it tells you 10 stitches across by 14 inches, not inches, stitches deep. Okay? And so you'll cast on 10 and then you'll stitch 14 rows. That's what the R is for, row. Stitching 10, casting on 10, and you'll stitch 14 rows. Okay? And that should come out to 4 by 4 inches or 10 by 10 centimeters. If it's too big, you've stitched too loosely. If it's too small, you've stitched too tightly. It is very difficult, whether you're knitting or crocheting, to get an exact swatch. but it can be done with practice. All right, so let's look at this third box. This is for us crocheters. Okay, they're also having you do a 10 by 10 centimeter or 4 by 4 inches. They're telling you that for this yarn, which is a super bulky 6, you need to use, it's called a K-hook, 10.5. I do not know what that means with the numbers down here. All I know is we need to go by the millimeters, okay? So a K-hook is a 6.5 millimeter crochet hook. So you need to cast on 9 single crochets, or not cast on, but stitch 9 single crochets, and then do 12 rows of single crochet. And that should get you your 4 by 4 inch or 10 by 10 centimeter swatch. And then you can check to see if you're on gauge. Now this works just to see how you're stitching, whether you're a tight stitcher or a loose stitcher. Me personally, I'm a little bit of a looser stitcher, and a lot of times I'll go up or down a hook size to adjust that. And that was the other thing I wanted to talk to you about today, is when we're looking at our yarns, okay, you can see the difference in the thicknesses. And that's what that number has to do with, of course. Now, sometimes I may be using, say, a light 3, but I want it to be more open and lacy. Well, this one says to use a 4 millimeter. Well, I might use a 6 millimeter or a 5 millimeter to make it a little bit more loose. Or maybe I'm using the 4 medium weight. Okay, but I want it to be a lot tighter stitch. Well, this is saying use a 5.5, but I don't want any holes in it, and I want to make it, a tighter stitch. So I might go down a hook size, and that's how you adjust the thickness of the stitches. You can go up or down. So the real question in this is, do I follow what the yarn weight says, or do I follow the pattern? And I would say that for the most part, use the crochet hook that the designer of the pattern is asking you to use. That way you'll have the same results as the pattern. So that explains what the chart is all about. So let me answer some questions that people have about that. Okay, so number 1, you have a pattern, you love it, and you're using, let's say, a medium weight number 4 yarn. You're all ready to go. You've got the yarn, and then you start reading the pattern, and the pattern suggests a different hook size than what the yarn suggests. Okay, so this one suggests using a 5.5, which is an eye hook, 5.5 millimeter. But the pattern says use a 6 millimeter, which is a J hook. And you're like, I don't know what to do. My suggestion, when in doubt, do a swatch. I know we hate to make swatches, but do a swatch of the pattern that you're doing. Let's say you're making this enormous shawl and you want it to work out the same, okay? And they're saying stitch 100 stitches. So just stitch 10, okay? And then work the pattern on those 10. Or maybe if it gives you repeats, work the repeats on just a few. And then measure and see how it measures out to what the pattern designer is calling for. If you want it to be perfect, that is. You can also do something I call measure as you go. And I like to use that. I am a big pusher of always having a tape measure in every one of my yarn bags. Wherever I sit to crochet, I have tape measures. And that's because everybody has a different gauge or tension. And it also depends on what you're watching or what you're listening to or what you're doing. You know, if you're watching a really scary or intense movie, you might crochet tighter because you're, or if you're listening to some soft, beautiful music, you might just be crocheting along. A lot of times I love to sit out on my back porch, put my music on to some soft music that doesn't have any words, and just sit out there and crochet, because I also am a big proponent of trying to get 15 minutes of sunshine every day. It's very good for you for vitamin D. Okay, so my suggestion is when you have a pattern that gives you a hook suggestion size, I would do it with the hook that the crochet pattern designer has asked you to. it's usually for a purpose. They want it to be more lacy, or like I mentioned earlier, or it doesn't want them to have, or it doesn't want you to have any holes. Like maybe a tapestry, you want that to, when you're stitching that, you want that to be nice and tight. Okay, but if you're making a lacy shawl or just a lacy wrap or something, you might want it open more so that it's more lacy and has nice drape. So another question about crochet patterns and yarn. You've got this beautiful pattern, like I said, you're getting ready to work it, but the pattern asks you to use, let's say it's listing Premier, just yarn, basic, value, medium weight number 4 in this color, which is a beautiful sea glass. But you want to make it in pink. Go ahead. You don't have to use the colors the designer says. Just make sure you use the right weight. All right. Another thing is, do you have to use the same weight the designer says? Yes, you must use the same weight or you will not get the same results. If you go down and use a light 3, this is a much thinner yarn. And so it's not going to stitch up the same. Okay. So that's why this chart is very important, because you need to look on your labels, see what the weight of the yarn is, see what the suggested crochet hook is, or if you're knitting it, the knitting, and then you're ready to go. Okay? Now, you may get confused because the designer is asking you to use a medium weight number 4, but they're asking you to use a hook that's different from what the label says. Don't panic, okay? Like I said, use the crochet hook that the designer has asked you to. All right, let's ask one more question. Let's say you've got the yarn that's the same weight. You've got the exact same crochet hook. You've decided on a color, because you don't have to do the same color as the designer did. But as you're working it, it's coming out way too big or way too small. Then you can adjust your hook. I always tell people, especially things like hats, everybody likes to wear their hat differently. Some people like a hat to fit nice and snug and tight, and some people like it a little bit looser. There are other things, like I have really thick hair, so I need even though my head size isn't very big, I have thick hair, and so I need room for my hair, and so it can differ by your preferences. So if you're making a hat, keep your tape measure as you go, and if it's coming out too big, go down a hook size. If it's coming out way too small and you can't even get it on your head, you can always go up a hook size or 2. You can adjust that, okay? I always say try that first before trying to finagle the multiples of a pattern, unless you just want to make it a great big blanket or something like that. But when it comes to hats and things that are stitched in the round, it's always easier first to try to adjust by going up and down with your hook sizes. Because usually it's just a tiny bit, and then when you go in and start finagling with it, the pattern doesn't work out right and you get frustrated, and we don't want that. We don't want you ever to be frustrated in crochet. We want you to love crochet just like we do. And when I say we, I'm talking about all of us crochet designers, because we love crochet. We love what we do. And we want you to love it as well. Okay? And that pretty much covers what I wanted to talk about today. So here's the question for you. What do you do? Do you only use the hook the yarn says, or do you use the crochet hook that the pattern states? Do you use other colors, or just go with the color that the pattern states? And do you feel free to use other brands? Because you can. When a pattern says a medium weight number 4, that can be any brand, unless it lists cotton or acrylic. Sometimes those are interchangeable, say with some hats. You want it to be a cooler hat? Make it out of cotton. You want it to be a little warmer? Make it out of wool, so you can do those things. Just the main things is to use the suggested hook on the pattern and the suggested yarn weight and go from there. All right. I would love to read your comments on this subject and about your experiences. And remember, there are no wrong answers. I love to read all the comments. I love to hear what you have to say, because remember, we can all learn from each other's as we go along in our crochet journey, because we're all at a different place in our crochet journey. And just because you've been crocheting for 100 years, I feel like I have, that doesn't mean I know everything, because I don't. I love to learn new techniques, new stitches, and new ideas, because crocheters are from all ages. And think of the things, if you're as old as me, I'm 62. So I've been crocheting for, almost 50 years now. And things have changed since I first started until now. Crochet is an ever-growing art full of so much fun. All right. So again, please comment. And also, give me your thoughts. And I'll see you next time for another edition of This or That, or maybe the other thing. Bye-bye.